Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Adam Bohlmeyer, the Fertility Clinic Liaison for the Embryo Adoption Awareness Center and Nightlight Christian Adoptions. This morning, we are very pleased to bring you the webinar entitled The Science of Secrecy. We have two excellent presenters sharing their expertise with us this morning. First, you will hear from Ms. Kris Probasco, who has over 40 years of experience in the adoption industry. Kris is the CEO and founder of Clinical Counseling Associates and regularly counsels egg and embryo donors as well as recipients from multiple clinics in the greater Kansas City area. In 1993, she founded Fertility and Adoption Associates, which became the first regional adoption agency and clinic partnership in the U.S. Also joining us this morning or afternoon is Mr. Thomas Rector, a BioSocial Cognition theorist and a national trainer. Mr. Rector is a member of the National Association of Family Child Care, the North American Council on Adoptable Children, the American Adoption Congress, and he is also the director of the court-appointed special advocates in Del Norte, California. We're thrilled to have him joining us this morning. But before we start, we need to take care of a bit of housekeeping. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation using the questions you submit through the Q&A feature. You may submit your questions at any time during the session, and we will answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, simply click on the Q&A panel in the lower right-hand portion of the screen. Type your question into the dialog box and then click the Send button. If you happen to be in the full screen view, you can click the question mark icon on the toolbar in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. This will open the Q&A panel on your screen only. When you submit your question, it will be visible to all of the panelists, but not visible to other attendees. We expect the presentation to last approximately 45 minutes and will take 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for that Q&A session. We will be distributing a copy of today's presentation and a comprehensive list of answers to all questions submitted today during the webinar. If for some reason you're experiencing any technical difficulties during the presentation, please contact WebEx Technical Support, and you'll see that number at the bottom of the screen. It is 866-229-3239. And as a reminder, we are recording this presentation today. So with that, I believe we are ready to begin, and I will throw it to you. Kris, thank you so much for being here today. We're thrilled to have you.
Oh, so welcome, and thank you for everyone attending, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on your location. I'm here in Kansas City in Central Time, and so glad to be part of this presentation. I'm going to be starting out talking about adoption and donor history and how the similarities for both ways of bringing children home are established. Next slide, please. So with our adoption history, if those are listening probably know some of this, but we have a dark history. We started with the children going into homes on basically a secret basis with sealed records. If a child was born without marriage, there was actually bastard stamped on their birth certificate. So the efforts for sealed records was really to create a new birth certificate that would not have that word on it, but also created sealed records. Sealed records are still in existence in 2014, and many of the adoption reform movement members are trying to get states to reverse that. The orphan trains has a huge history with adoption, and especially here in the Midwest. So children that had lost their parents or their parents weren't able to care for them were actually loaded up and put on a train and come to the Midwest. And this is where the word put up for adoption came from, because the children were actually put up on a stage, and then families would say which child they wanted. And a lot of the times it's for labor work or handmaiden work, and not so much for wanting a child to parent and be part of their family. In Mason City, Iowa, there's actually a reunion event that goes on for the offsprings of the orphan train. So that really shows that generation of generation really cares about their history and how they came to families. The next slide. Adoption in the modern era. I started doing adoption work in 1972, so I've seen so much difference in the process and been very pleased to be part of it. But adoption was seen as a solution to infertility. A lot of infants were available for adoption. Kansas City was one of the more popular places for adoption. We had over 14 maternity homes here in Kansas City. And women would come by the train. We had a good train system. And they would come to the maternity homes, give birth, and then leave and go back home. So they were staying with Aunt Sue or Uncle James for a while and then came back not pregnant. So there was a lot of shame and embarrassment around being pregnant outside of marriage, and also a lot of shame and embarrassment of not being able to have children. Lots and lots of stories of women putting pillows in their garment to act as they're pregnant. They go visit Aunt Sue and come home with a baby. The baby came early from their pretend pregnancy. So anonymous secrecy was part of how adoption was operated, and the intentions was to protect all parties, but really I think it was more protecting the institution and the way that children was being provided to families. We hope that there were loving homes and families for children, but there was a lot of pretending and anonymous activity going on. Next slide, please. Adoption in the modern era, how we have changed. So adoption is for the purpose of creating a family. We're looking for families for children rather than children for families. And when you have that way of operating, you really have a different viewpoint of how adoption is best determined. Next slide, please. So the adoption reform movement, I was part of this, and many support and reunion groups are available in the United States, over 130, where adult adoptees and birth parents are trying to find each other. We've also had lots of adoption research, which really focused on the needs of the child and found out that secrecy and anonymity was not meeting the needs of anyone in the adoption triad, especially the child. So as you become more child-focused, you focus on the emotional well-being of the child, and then we also understand that children have a life beyond infancy. I mean, the nerve of them. Once they're born, then they grow up and become adults and have their own thinking and ideas. And so a lot of times when we talk about adoption, we talk about adoption children. They're only children for a small period of time before they become adults with adult needs. Next slide, please. So the history of donor insemination, same kind of setup. First sperm donation was in 1884, if one can believe that, in Philadelphia. Documentations showed that physicians would use their own sperm, and lo and behold, they became miracle workers where women would go to these physicians and they would become pregnant. Of course, we couldn't talk about male factor infertility because that would be offensive to think that a man would not be fertile. And this was kept very secret. Even the families didn't know that they had a child from the physician. So deep, dark in the closet. We've moved very fast when we started with our fertility treatment into where we are today. The first IVF baby, test tube baby, was Mary Louise Brown, born in 1978. She is now, if I get my math right, in her 30s or early 40s and has children of her own. So fast after that, we had our first egg donation conception in 1983, and that was in California. And then our first frozen embryo donation was in 1986. So the freezing of embryos became part of the industry very quickly, and they gathered the information of how to freeze human embryos from the animal industry. Next slide. So by the numbers, we estimate that there's over 60,000 children born each year by anonymous sperm, egg, or embryo, which outdoes infant and international adoption put together. The Donnelly Institute estimates that there's about 25,000 children that are placed in infant adoptions in the United States, and our 2012 statistics on international adoption is in the mid-20s. So we add that together, and children coming into families by a donor conception outnumber both infant and international adoption. Also, we have many, many little frozen embryos that are waiting for a decision. We estimate over 600,000, so that's a lot of embryos that are in storage facilities and also in clinics. And most of these frozen embryos are without a decision of what's going to happen for their outcome. So we need to pay attention to these numbers and really focus on the needs of the child. Next slide. So by the numbers, 1/6 of the married population has documented infertility and medical issues. We think that has risen, and we're also looking at some studies that are done in England regarding environmental and hormonal influx on fertility, especially male factor infertility. Also, lots of research is done on genetic incompatibility for couples that actually get together and genetically they're not able to make an embryo. So I think the more we know about fertility difficulties, the numbers are going to even increase more. As good as we are, and we're really good at trying to make genetic children, only 50% will reach their goal of having a genetic child, which means the other 50% will be looking at other alternatives in terms of bringing children into their family, which includes donor conceptions, embryo adoption, traditional adoption, if there is such a thing, international adoption, foster care adoption, or being child-free. So the reality of looking at an alternative is that you will receive a child that is not a full genetic child to the couple. And the families have to do a considerable amount of grief work in order to accept that this child that they're going to be parenting is not their dream child, is not the child that they had intended to parent, but it's the child that has come to them by their own decision for a donor conception. So when couples hear, especially in the medical practices of, you can keep this a secret, this is an anonymous process, nobody needs to know, I think initially that really fits their emotional need, because their emotional need is to pretend that they're going to have a genetic child that's connected to both of them. But the needs of the child are not met through secrecy or anonymity. And so a donor pregnancy in some ways provides a cover-up. So we're pregnant, nobody needs to know, the child doesn't need to know, so it's really a setup for disconnect. We in the mental health field, and Tom's going to be talking a lot about this, understand that attachment and bonding really starts with the pregnancy, and when the pregnancy results in an untruth, there can be slippery attachment, that the attachment is not full. So what the parents are saying basically is that we will accept this child in our heart and in our minds only if we can pretend that they are our full genetic child. So it's really a setup for a lot of limitations on the quality for the child, and Tom will get into a lot of this. So this is where it starts, in that the parents so want to have a genetic child that they're willing to not really admit or do the grief process that this is where we needed to go in order to become parents. So a lot of shame and embarrassment still continues in this day. In 2014, you would think we would have learned more, but it is an emotional need fulfilled for the parents, in that we do not want to admit to ourselves or to others that we were not able genetically to have children. Next slide. So the parallels between adoption and donor conception, I think we have learned this, that secrecy doesn't work, anonymity doesn't work, and now we're in reform. The adoption reform movement is well and alive, and the donor reform movement is beginning. There is a current registry, the Donor Sibling Registry, that has over 40,000 members that are signed up, that are trying to find their kin. They're trying to find half-siblings and also their donors. I think this just represents that there's lots of interest and needs from the child's perspective into adulthood to connect with their genetic kin. And it's something that is formed by their identity needs as well as medical information. So the reform is happening, and I hope the reform can touch some of the fertility programs so that they can understand how they need to start their information provided to families. So being part of the reform movement, both in adoption and donor, is very exciting and focuses on the needs of the child. Next slide, please. So the end result is the child. I did a webinar, I think it was just a week ago, and so there was a question about, it's just an embryo compared to giving birth to a child and letting that child be adopted. But the end result is a child, regardless if it's an embryo adoption or a traditional adoption. The end result is a child that has needs, has emotional needs, psychological needs, identity needs that need to be fulfilled in an open environment for the child to be as successful as possible into an adulthood. So regardless of how the child comes to the family, if they are a part of a donor conception or an adoption, they have issues, and recognizing those and being prepared to help the child understand them is the parent's responsibility. Next slide. The triad. We have the child, we have the donors, and we have the adoptive and recipients. And if the triad could be in a circle, if we could circle that triad, we would all be communicating with each other, and that we would be focusing in on the giving part and the receiving part, and how both of their roles affects the child's growth and development. Next slide, please. So best practice is child-centered. We have found this out over and over again through adoption research, and we are finding this out also with all the donor offsprings that are coming forward and saying, being raised in secrecy was harmful for me. It caused conflict. I have identity and trust issues. I have relationship difficulties. If I couldn't trust my parents to tell me the truth, who in the world can I trust? So best interest of children are, when you focus in on the needs of the child, it may be a little bit more complicated at first, a lot of grief work, a lot of education, but the child benefits in the family that is open and honest. Next slide, please. And I think this is Mr. Tom. Tom, thanks so much for being here with us this morning. I presented this idea to Tom at one of the conferences we were at, the American Adoption Congress last year, and I said, would you be willing to think about doing this? He said yes, and this is what yes creates. He gets to be on the webinar. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Kris, and welcome everybody for being here. I'm going to speak to the behaviors, and I'm really child-centric in my conversation, but we all are acting and choosing and making choices, which I would fit into the category of behavior. And I'm going to speak from the viewpoint of biosocial cognition, and bio being biology, social being people, interaction, cognition being mind thinking. So going forward with this, to go over what I'm going to cover, the first item I want to bring into the room is the science. Bring some information into that, and then go into what is our role as parents, and then what is the impact of secrecy, what is happening with secrecy, how do we figure out the quality of life for our children, and then what's going on within the brain that is affecting this, because truly the brain is where our behavioral choices are coming from. And then what is the effect of secrecy on the brain's choices, and from there, how do we mix and get parenting and science to be comfortable with each other? So first, science in and of itself has just brought tremendous opportunity to us, and when Kris gives us that information with regard to how many folks who would not have succeeded at creating their family have been able to create their family just with the assistance of the science, and then from there going on to those who need to have greater assistance or an alternative way of going to create their family. And that's with that sperm and egg donation and the embryo creations. But when we do this, when we bring science into it, then we bring new situations to our families. And fundamental to that is the question, who are mom and dad? Who am I? And this, as Kris has outlined, has created quite a history for us. Whether it's important, is it not important, what is the implications of the information, when is the information provided, how does this work? And what we need to do is look at it from the parents' responsibilities first, and what do we do? How do we handle this? Where do we go? What is the effect? How does it fit into who we are? And we want to start off with getting a clear idea that mom and dad have been traditionally defined as a biological meaning and a familial meaning relationship. It was one and the same. And this child's self-identity was then easily set by just starting with mom and dad, who they grew up with, who has helped them, who's brought them through life. But now we have science in there, which has created a multifaceted delivery system, if you want to call it that, a multifaceted way of getting this information to the children so that the biological and familial relationships are not as obvious, and that multiple people hold parts of that information. They hold parts of the biological conversation, they hold parts of the familial relationships, and it's actually not just the current generation, but the previous generations that make up each one of these branches of information. And with us embracing science, and helping us create our families, we are also embracing the need to bring more information and figure out how to bring that information forward. So the question is, why does this change matter? Well, it matters to the child. And as Kris also pointed out, a child is just a stage working toward adulthood. We spend the vast majority of our lifetime as an adult, and therefore the childhood is the development stage of an adult. And what we need to do is we need to really be clear about what's happening. And self-identity of the child is founded upon their biological and familial roots. That's how they see it. And we see this over and over where folks come from specific ethnic backgrounds, they come from particular race backgrounds, and they need to know the history. They need to know that. It's just fundamental to themselves. Their identity is founded on that. And when we leave something out, then the child is truly missing a piece of themselves. They're missing a piece of their self-identity. The second part of it is health, and we see this information in the news over and over again, and more of it, that our health is so closely tied to our personal genetics. And the way those genetics unfold is over a lifetime. They don't unfold on day one or when we're 20 years old or 30 years old. They unfold all the way through life. And for the child not to have access to that information is potentially detrimental to their health. And as an adult, not having access to that information, what did mom do? How did she handle that? What was grandma's symptoms for this particular part of their life? And I can tell you, we have our two youngest are adopted, and the youngest, Danielle, when she first had the opportunity to write to her birth mother from a young teenager's viewpoint, the very first question was specifically when and how did her menstrual period affect her birth mother. That was the very first question, and no one else can answer that question. So that genetic information, that preference of the individual is huge. To withhold this information is secrecy. So why do we have secrecy? We have it. We all have it. It's part of our society. It's part of actually relationships. And why do we have it? And the first reason that we bring secrecy forward, and we see it the most, is for protection. We're protecting feelings of ourselves. We're protecting feelings of others. We're trying to avoid consequences. I go driving back and forth on the weekends, commute back and forth from home to work, and I get pulled over by the CHP, and he wants to write me up with a ticket. I have this ticket now. It's just a lot easier not to share this embarrassing and expensive event with anybody, but somewhere along the line, that information is going to come forward. But the sense of holding that information back is a protection thing. We also use secrecy to protect our possessions. Where did we put those things? Where shall we put those things? And in each case, we're using it to protect from a fear of something we anticipate that could happen or is likely to happen. And with that, we have a second reason that we use secrecy, and it is for power. And that's not a pretty one, but it's a reality. It's used to maintain power over something or someone or resources. It's used to take for oneself. And it is truly the opposite of what parenting is. Parenting is not about power. It's about investing in another person, another child, so that person can continue on. So how does this apply to parenting? how do we use this information to enable our parenting to be as successful as possible? Well, we need to really understand what parenting is and what it's about and why we're doing it. And so many times we start, and I can speak for myself, when Shelley and I started off, the conversation was, let's have a baby, and it wasn't about let's have an adult. It was let's have a baby. We'd like to do that. We were one of the fortunate couples in that that wasn't a difficult thing to do, but it really wasn't a conversation, well, let's have an adult and what will their job be? It's a wonderful thing to have a family, and it's something that we really grow from, the children grow from, we as individuals grow from. It brings us into life in a fashion that is very difficult to duplicate any other way. And it truly starts a much greater event, a much greater dynamic, because our children bring us into the world, we respond to them and what their interests are. We have taken on, as a parent, we have taken on the responsibility for a new person. And we need to be clear as to what that responsibility is. And that responsibility is to create an adult. And we would like that adult to be someone that is as comfortable or more comfortable with their life as we are. No matter what, each child will reach a biological state of adulthood. That happens. That's just the way it is. But secondarily, and most importantly, I think, to us as adults and as parents, is that we have a social definition of what adulthood is, and we use the word maturity. And if you asked 6 people about what maturity is, they'll give you 6 different answers. And there is an overlapping, underlying kind of meaning to that. And it starts off with, we have a social expectation that an adult will be self-sufficient. They can take care of themselves. And we each have our own definition of take care of ourselves, but fundamentally it starts with self-sufficiency. And we have expectations that that self-sufficiency will be done within a certain ethical, moral realm, which includes being honest, being respectful, respect others, respect yourself, and taking responsibility for your actions and your impact on those around you. So we have really 2 elements that occur in adulthood. One is biologically, and second is the social maturity. However, as parents, there's one more aspect that we strive for, and that is the quality of life. What about the quality of life for our child? And quality of life, if you, again, you ask 6 different people what quality of life is, you'll typically hear about having food on the table, or having a car that doesn't break down when you go to work, or having a job that is satisfying. However, underneath all of that, the quality of life starts with the feeling of being safe. Need to be able to be safe. So that car that doesn't break down takes you to places that you're comfortable with. And that we have a personal self-esteem. We feel good about ourselves. We can have all kinds of material things and still not be happy with life, not have that quality. And the third is that when we do something, we create something, we work on something, we contribute to something, we feel like we are successful. It is a success. We are not pushing water upstream. We're not seeing ourselves as a failure. Those 3 components are what really are the foundation that all the other material things, all the other relationship things are built upon. For a child and for us, these are perceptions. They are perceptions. These are not something that you can hand to somebody in a box. I cannot go to any one of my 5 children and say, here's a nice, neat, tidy box, and with whatever is in this box, you now will feel safe, or that you will believe in yourself, or that you will do all your tasks and believe you actually succeeded. They have to have their own perception. So where and how do we create perceptions? And these are in the brain. Perceptions are a byproduct of living life. They are perception of the information, the experiences, and the meanings attached to those. So I've used this example before, is my 2 younger sons were out on an 80-acre ranch, and I've asked them to build some fence to hold in our emus, of which we're hatching eggs right at the moment. And they are 2 different people. One of them is a planner, or a task person, or an organizer. One of them is a big picture people feelings person, and they 2 go out to build this fence, and when they're done, they walk away and they have a different perception of that fence project. One of them is it's organized, it's structured, it works, it contains, it does the function. The other one is that the animals are safe and protected. Those are the meanings that are attached to that information, and they created a perception in their own mind. So when we look at the brain, we need to understand how it processes the information and what that processing does to creating perception. So let's look at the dynamics of the brain. And we're going to look at them through the perception of biosocial cognition. And there are 5 points to biosocial cognition. The first one is human behavior is a response to an individual's environment based off the interactive dynamics of biology, neurology, and genetics. Behavior is a response. It responds to a person's environment. So when we look at a person who's delivering a behavior to you, or a child that's acting out, that behavior is a response, and they responded to something that's in the environment, and the type of response is being directly impacted by their biology, being humans, 1, neurology, their memories and information processing, genetics, their individuality. The second point is that behavioral responses are driven by the genetic mandate to survive. Another way you can say that, a genetic mandate to be safe. And we really need to understand what drives what's underneath each of our behaviors. We're in this room today listening to this information, and we chose to be here. We chose to be here because we have a belief that there's an opportunity for some information that will help me be more successful at some aspect of my life. We responded to the information that was provided. We're in the environment as we sit, and we're listening to this information, and we are processing it, and we're responding in either making notes or shaking our head or nodding our head or listening, but our behavioral responses are unique to the environment, and they were motivated to occur because we wanted to be safer, we wanted to survive. The third item of biosocial cognition is that adaptation is the primary defense of survival. We adapt our behavioral responses to survive. We don't have big teeth. We don't have long claws. We don't run fast. We surely don't jump very high. Those kinds of defense mechanisms do not work for our species. What we do is we change our behavior, or we repeat the behavior if that's what's working. The fourth item is the information of our memories is the foundation of our adaptation. To be able to adapt, we need to be able to compare the existing current situation that we're in with something in the past. Adaptation is a comparison and choice. So we take this moment while we're sitting here and we're listening, and we are choosing to make notes or stay with it or continue and be patient with it. Our children do the same thing. They see a situation and they compare it to what they know, what is in their memories, and then they choose a behavioral response. The fifth item is genetics of the individual directly impacts the memories formed. And I'll go back to my two sons and building those fences for the emus, because they are uniquely different people. In fact, one is our birth child and one is our adopted child. So there's a very, very distinct difference in their pool of genetics. And because of that, that experience is different. So while you can have the same experience, you can have a very different takeaway from that. So these 5 components of biosocial cognition then inform us as to how we can parent and how we can create the environment of our parenting to help our children go forward. And the perception of self comes from these memories, from what we put there, what they accumulate over life's experiences, and they're built upon the past. They're built layer upon layer. And again, I'll go back to my two sons in the fence. When they went out and built that fence, that wasn't the first fence they built. They got the opportunity to work with me as I built other fences and learned how to use the tractor to drill holes and learned how to use the post hole digger to clean them out and how to pack the posts and how to pull a string and how to pull the wire and how not to pull the wire. And so they did not go out and build this fence. They went out and implemented what they had as a resource of memories and information and came away with a success. They know they can do it. They know they can do it without Dad around. So when we are parenting and we're creating this perception of self, we are doing it through memories, we're doing it through the accumulation of life's experiences, and we're doing it layer upon layer. And from the brain's standpoint, it looks at those memories and starts with the assumption that they are accurate, that they're true, that they are what they are. They don't get looked at and get evaluated. They start with this is what it is, because it needs those memories to be able to compare. And if we have a new situation and we got to be able to compare it to something else, and that's foundation of memories is it was inherently questioned, then how would you know which choice to go with? So the brain takes those memories and treats them as fact. And we see this in relationships with people where there might be 5 people in a particular circumstance, and 4 of those folks have a pretty overlapping recollection of what happened there, but the 5th person has something different. However, they believe what they believe as strongly as the 4 people do. Memories are the foundation for choosing our behavior to be safe. They are the foundation. Whatever is there is what we draw upon, is what we pull our memories, our behaviors from. So what happens if memories are doubted? So we'll take these 5 people who saw this circumstance, and 4 of them are overlapping significantly on what they believe. The 5th is not, and the 4 people can bring to the 5th person fact, 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 and the person takes this information and says, oh, well, I guess I didn't understand that correctly. Well, I was in a similar situation like that a few weeks ago. I wonder if I'm not remembering that correctly now. And what happens is we have a memory on all these memories, and they're built on layers and layers, and then we bring some sort of fundamental information that creates doubt. So how sure are we in our adaptive behavior when we have doubt? How can we feel safe if there isn't clarity, if there isn't certainty? How can we feel good about ourselves if we have doubt? How can we look at something and say we were successful when we're not sure that that was the whole story? So the feeling of safe, self-esteem, to be able to do something successfully are undermined. So, are we protecting with secrecy? Secrecy. Protection or power. The brain processes secrecy as a threat to its ability to choose the best adaptive behavior to be safe. Secrecy is not something the brain feels comfortable with. It does not consider the unknown to be a protection. And we know that from our own experiences. Anytime you take any one of us and ask us to go do something that's totally new, like go out and I want you to learn how to play lacrosse now. Well, I've never done that before. You're thrown out on the field and you need to play, and this is how it works. Do we feel comfortable? No. No. It's just the way the brain works is it's uncomfortable when it's in an unknown situation. And we never feel safe when we have to subordinate our choices to somebody else. We want to be able to make our own choices because we have chosen a behavior that we think is what's going to work. So to be subordinate to a power is always an uncomfortable thing. And this is not about a person situation. This is about how the brain processes, because the brain is an adaptive processing organ. Secrecy undermines the ability to create the perception of quality of life. Quality of life being feeling safe, self-esteem, functioning successfully. When we have information that's withheld, we do not have all of it, then we don't have all the resources to act upon. And when we know that there's missing information, then we don't know how reliable our knowledge truly is, and therefore we create doubt. And doubt is something that does not create a sense of feeling or self-esteem. So the conversation should revolve around how parents can bring the truth to the brain, which will provide the best opportunity for the child to achieve quality of life. Not what information, not when, but how. How do we bring that to the child? And we bring that to the child in layers, little bit layers. It has to be age appropriate, has to be development appropriate, it needs to be sequential in its approach. And we want to purposely and intentionally build this knowledge that forms the roots for the individual to draw upon as they go forward in life. Science of secrecy. Secrecy undermines the child's feelings of safety. It undermines their opportunity to have positive self-esteem, and it truly compromises their sense of success. So, when parents embrace science and the truth of the science within their family, they reap the most from the opportunity, and it is an opportunity. The child feels safe and secure. This builds their self-esteem, and it results in their ability to function successfully. The child will carry this. They will have it in their brain. They will carry this with them for the rest of their life, and that is what they will draw upon to make their choices. Thank you.